Last quick thing I want to mention, this is a positive note for America and positive note really for President Trump. There are, we happen in America and probably all over the world, people get captured by whatever the top topic is in the headline. So right now, everyone's been talking about COVID. Everyone's been talking about President Trump testing positive, going to Walter Reed Hospital as a temporary, out of an abundance of caution measure. He's fine. He's already back at the White House. He's sounding strong and good. So we have these stories that capture our attention, or stories about, it's COVID, coronavirus, any latest story that the left can dream up to make you hate Trump. Those seem to capture our headlines. But underneath all of that, I want to remind you of some things that are actually happening. One is the Islamization of America, the Islamic supremacist mindset that says they're using immigration to come to America as a means of conquering America for Sharia, for Islam. That's still happening. It's happening while we are diverted, our attention is diverted to be understanding the latest about the coronavirus, the latest news on the vaccine, the latest news on President Trump's condition. All of these things I'm about to mention are all still happening. The Islamization of America is still happening. The cultural jihad in America is still happening. The radical left's determination to instill hatred toward America is still happening in academia, in our public schools, from kindergarten through grad school. The radical left's replacement of study of the real American history, and replacing that with America, with teaching intended to cultivate hatred of America. The 1619 Project idea, intending to rob American students of understanding the uniqueness of America's founding, the uniqueness and the greatness of America, the greatness of their founding ideas. All that's still happening. The Islamization is still happening. The attack on the America as founded, the attack on love and reverence for the ideas of America are still happening. All sorts of radical leftist attacks on the goodness of America are still happening. And sometimes we can forget, in the light of all that, how many good things have happened in this country, especially and specifically under President Trump. I'm going to dedicate a show soon to just running through, an entire show running through the accomplishments and success of President Trump on massive policy issues, pointing out where we were headed, what the left was trying to do, and where we are now under President Trump. But one thing, I want to close this show with a very upbeat story. So you remember just a few weeks ago, there was a fabulous announcement out of Washington. They had a wonderful press conference where President Trump was announcing, through his work in the Middle East, an agreement between Israel and the Muslim majority nation, the UAE, United Arab Emirates. So the UAE and Israel formed a peace deal. And so they're now working together. And the same thing is happening with Israel and Bahrain and other countries also. President Trump brought about these historic peace deals in great part because he didn't follow the State Department established long-term protocol rule that says you can't get any peace deals between Israel and the surrounding Islamic majority countries until first Israel solves the dispute with the Palestinians. Israel gets to peace terms with the Palestinians. So that's because for decades there has been that kind of unstated rule, or that's actually a very stated rule by the alleged intellectual experts at the State Department, that you can't move forward with Israel until you get the Palestinian deal set up. And President Trump finally said, you know what, we're not waiting. We don't have to wait until we figure out a deal that the Palestinians will accept, because they won't accept anything that makes sense. So he moved forward, got this deal going. So I want to remind people, I'm going to do, as I say, a show running through a lot of Trump's accomplishments, but this one thing, not just that it was a great thing that happened, that he got this deal and got it pulled together, and it's not just President Trump, it's experts, high-level officials, of course, in Israel, and high-level people in UAE and Bahrain. But what I want to mention about this is the practical consequence, the real-life meaning of this deal. Just one example. So there is an Israeli a venture capital organization called Our Crowd, a venture capital group that basically takes in investments from around the world, people who want to invest in startup companies or new companies. They take in investment money and they fund small startups. And they fund startups actually of various sizes, but it's called Our Crowd. And what I'm getting around to telling you, an example of a real life meaning of a huge step of progress made on the Trump administration in getting to the deal with Israel and the UAE was that Our Crowd just announced that they signed an MOU, which I'm sure you know, Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, on October 1st. So Our Crowd, based in Israel, always struggling to make deals with the surrounding Islamic majority countries because they had this kind of historic, ancient, hatred or division. Our Crowd signed an MOU on October 1st with Abdullah Saeed Juman Al Nubada, chairman of the Al Nubada Investment Company, which is based in the UAE. And so why I say this is a real life meaning, so now you have a deal between Our Crowd, fabulous set of companies and entities that invest money and entities that they fund. So now you have the prosperity that comes from a venture capital firm, the prosperity spreading into UAE. So now UAE and their investors can be part of and understand this. And Our Crowd is just a huge name in the Middle East, in Israel and in the Middle East. So you have UAE now involved with Our Crowd and the companies they invest in, they support, which ends up making life better for the average Joe all over the world, and especially the average Joe in the UAE. You're going to bring more prosperity to the UAE, more jobs. You're going to have people investing and probably Our Crowd investing in companies that the UAE can bring to the table that are going to be part of what Our Crowd can say, yeah, that looks like a good deal. We'll work on that together. You have people working together outside of government channels, outside of the United Nations, and people is working together to bring good ideas to funding, to fruition, to make life better for people in the UAE and other countries as this idea grows. And I'm getting around to saying, as I close out the show today, there's so much good that's come to this world through having President Donald Trump come on board to win the presidency in 2016 and to move America back to being its position of strength, a standard bearer for liberty, a standard bearer for freedom and free markets and capitalism, a strong leader in the world, a leader in the world that is dedicated to helping to ideas like this, finding solutions, perhaps out of the box solutions, unique solutions. You have a president who was a non-political guy, no political resume, just a vastly successful businessman, bringing those skills, bringing that thinking to the thinking about America, which obviously has blessed America in other ways too, as we have new trade deals, more jobs in America, businesses bringing their companies back to America. So American jobs happening here, which blesses the family dinner table in states all over this country, including especially in the Rust Belt, the heartland America that lost so many jobs. You have so much good coming from the policies and the ideas that President Trump has brought to this country and to the world. We're going to spend, I think, probably Thursday this week talking about that idea, just trying to really recognize how much America has changed because of the policies President Trump brought to the table in America, including this particular example of getting to the point where he got a deal between Israel and the UAE, which ends up meaning jobs, food in the family dinner table, and growing prosperity for people in the UAE.